Hey, what's going on, Tamers? It's me, East, another year older, another year wiser, and another year playing Digimon. Just wanted to say thanks for the short birthday break, but now that I'm back, we have a ton of stuff to catch up on. During my short hiatus, BT17 Secret Crisis finally released over here in Asia, and this set is interesting because it expands on a lot of older decks to not only build up in terms of power, but also sideways in terms of what the actual game plan is. It gave support to older decks like Shine Greymon, Imperial Dramon, Diaboromon, Red Hybrid technically, Ancient Garurumon and Ancient Greymon, and a lot more. That being said, let's take a look at some event results, a couple of key takeaways, and a close look at some of the decks that topped over the course of the past week. So before we actually dive into the results for this week, I want to talk about something that made this set's release week really special, and that is that Bandai held its first ever Alphamon battles during the release week of BT17. This basically amounted to a special tournament at nearly all the card shops that sold Digimon. I think it was over 100 as far as my research could confirm. They did a tournament where the buy under the entry fee was to buy one box of BT17, and then you get to play in a tournament for a special Alphamon foil card from BT13. It's an alt art, looks really clean, looks really nice. And the participants for that event also got not only a box, because you entered to pay for it, but also an Alphamon card that's non-foil. And honestly, this event was a huge success. I had so much fun talking with, meeting with, and hanging out with people who play Digimon. There were even people who had just started up the game that week there. So honestly, I hope this is something that Bandai continues to do moving forward. Great idea. I had a ton of fun doing it at my own local card shop. And thanks in part to those events happening, we have nearly double the amount of events we would normally have during the course of a week. Where normally it's about 75 or so, we have nearly 150 this time to look at. Which is precisely the reason that you see so many decks represented at the mega level here for this week's results. And because these Alphamon cards from the events were so sought after, you can see there are two camps that people pretty much fell into for results. The first is that there are people who just said, I'm going to run the decks that I knew were strong in the past, things like Numamon and Mirage Galgamon. They don't really need much tinkering with or much toying with. Also things like Vaccine Armor, decks that have been proven time and time again in the past couple of sets, and I think they're still strong. And the second camp were the folks who wanted to try all of the new cards that came out in BT17. Things like the new updated FenriLoogamon support, the new updated Imperial Dramon support, the new Dexdorogoromon deck, or I guess the updated Dexdorogoromon support as well. Diaboromon got some new win conditions as well as new cards to play with, as well as Shine Greymon. There's this completely brand new deck that is very terrifying, which features the Omnimon Ace as its boss monster or boss card. And honestly, I think a lot of folks don't really have it on their radar right now, but you probably should. Something that was also really eye-opening this first week was that people could build decks vertically for more power in the case of things like the Imperial Dramon I mentioned before, which has got new cards that made them stronger. But also, decks like the Ancient Greymon and the Ancient Garurumon showed that you can take hybrid decks and build them in two different ways now. And while the results for these decks weren't amazing in its first week, just these past couple of days during this week, folks have really started to explore the potential of both of these kinds of decks, as well as other decks like Eosmon. All that being said, I'm really interested in seeing how these next few weeks shake up, and also what builds come out of a lot of these decks that we're seeing here. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to keep my eyes glued to written results, so keep your eyes glued here to this channel to see more about that. The first deck we're going to take a look at in the BT17 Secret Crisis set is going to be the new updated FenriLoogamon deck, featuring the new FenriLoogamon Takemikazuchi Secret Rare card, which you see here, as well as the Chase version of it right here, which is probably the closest I'll ever get to one. It features some familiar faces from previous iterations of the deck, things like level 3 Lugamons, as well as the Ukomon here, as a couple copies of the Hell Lugamons as a way to cycle through the deck and also get rid of big targets on board, and the Analog Youth, which has been a common staple since the deck's inception. The deck does have some new faces, or I guess new versions of old faces, in the form of Cracker Fang, who counts as an AG Tamer, and he essentially does the same thing the AG Tamer does from previous sets, except he sets memory to 3 instead of giving you just +1 memory at the start of the turn. Which is probably one of the reasons you see the huge shift here from the 3 cost 1 to the 4 cost, because he's always going to set you to 3 no matter what. The level 4 Lugarmons that you're used to seeing in this deck have all been hollowed out in favor of the new SOC, or I guess new old SOC, Dorgamon and the Dexdorogoromon from this set. The versatility for these level 4s is actually really nice. The Dorgamon here giving you some more card cycle whenever you play him, as well as the ability to taunt your opponent if you have a Tamer underneath him, to make them attack at the start of their next main phase. And then whenever it would be deleted, you can use the Dexdorogoromon from Trash to evolve and then not be deleted. They also support some really useful inheritance effects in things like +1000 on both turns from the Dorgamon, as well as Reboot from the Dexdorogoromon, which is actually a really useful ability considering the AG Tamers and the Cracker Fang Tamers do give blocker. And finally, the level 6s and above for this deck are all new with the new BT17 FenriLoogamon and BT17 Kazuchimon. Whenever you evolve into the FenriLoogamon, you can just play a Kazuchimon from your trash for free, and then from there you can just DNA Digivolve into your Takemikazuchi. And it doesn't really matter how much memory you spend to actually get to the FenriLoogamon, because once you DNA Digivolve into the Takemikazuchi, he automatically sets your memory to 3 no matter where it is on the board. And normally while FenriLoogamon's effects would make your turn end while your opponent's memory is at 3, the Takemikazuchi gives you a way to actually gain 1 memory so you can continue to swing and make huge checks on your opponent's side of the board. I think through the course of all of his effects, he wipes out something like 36,000 DP worth of Digimon on your opponent's side of the board, so keeping all that in mind, it's really hard to find something this deck doesn't have. Tons of DP minus, so you got tons of removal. It recovers when you get to the Takemikazuchi. You can nearly wipe out your opponent and OTK them in a single turn. You can actually kill them from turn 2 so that they could basically like play Digimon and then just lose. Yeah, this deck is actually insane. And as a testament to the strength, you can see the winner here actually included their prize cards. So these aren't part of the deck, he's just showing them off. This one up here is the champion version for the Alphamon Battles events, which is the foil version of the card, and then the regular participants version is the one right down here. Before this set came out, I think a lot of folks didn't really have high expectations for this FenriLoogamon deck, but after seeing that it can kill on turn 2 and OTK an opponent at nearly any point in the game, folks have definitely changed their opinion. And the next deck we're going to look at is going to be the newly introduced BT17 Omnimon Ace deck, where I think a lot of folks didn't really understand the power and the potential this deck has, just because by looking at it on paper, it doesn't really seem that effective or strong at all, but in practice is a very different story. The thing you'll probably notice about this deck at first glance is that there are no level 5s at all. It focuses solely on the Agumon and Gabumon cards alongside Ukomon to search out all the cards you need in the deck in the form of Tamers, as well as the War Greymon, the Metal Garurumon, and the Omnimon Ace. It features a couple copies of the new secret rare Greymon introduced in the set, who's a nice form of removal, as well as some flexible evolutions off of red and blue, both for this deck, and also keeps the name, interestingly enough, of all the Digimon underneath it as well, which means technically this Greymon can Digivolve into an Agumon Bond of Courage. Outside of that, the other level 4s for this deck include the Greymon that lets you play Tamers for free if you don't have one on the board with tie in its name, and that's because the Tamers in this deck are so paramount to the game plan. The game plan for the deck, pretty simple. You want to get down one of these red and blue tie and mat Tamers very quickly using pretty much anything in the deck, including the white tie and Hikari Tamer, all the while finding your pieces in the form of the level 6 War Greymon, level 6 Metal Garurumon, and level 7 Omnimon Ace, and at least one copy of your Miraculous Ultimate Knight option card. Keep in mind this is red and blue. It can only be played when you have something red and blue on the board, which essentially means the Tamer is the easiest thing to get this out. Once you've got this card on the field, it lets you play a level 3 Agumon or Gabumon from your trash for 2 costs, which is a great premium, and then it stays on the field for a later delay effect, and then from there you just hard drop a War Greymon or a Metal Garurumon and keep the other one in hand, and as soon as your opponent tries to remove it on the board or attack, you can either blast DNA Digivolve into the Omnimon Ace, or if it would be destroyed in some way or removed from the board, you can just use the delay effect from the Miraculous Ultimate Knight to get the Omnimon Ace on board automatically. And because Omnimon Ace's removal ability is so powerful, your opponent pretty much loses their entire board at the same time. This guy's going to let you choose the Digimon on the board and then bottom deck every Digimon at the same level, and then from there, once that's done, you delete something on the board. Additionally, he's got blocker and raid. Because this removal effect is so strong, your opponent has to find some creative way to get around the ace or play and let the ace come out and then destroy it to get the overflow 5 effect. Something really interesting about this build is the inclusion of the 2 Imperial Digimon Paladin modes you see right here, where they can actually Digivolve off of the Metal Garurumon, and if your opponent tries to go wide, you can just win the game with this guy. In place of these 2 cards, a lot of other decks have been running 2 copies of the Omnimon Alter B as a way to essentially wipe out all of your opponent's security in one go once your Omnimon comes out. This is because the War Greymon has the ability once returned to drop your opponent's security whenever they attack, and then the Metal Garurumon has the ability to unspin whenever you attack. And because the Omnimon Alter B has the ability to transfer your opponent's security whenever it attacks, even though you're going to overflow with the Omnimon Ace, between the drop here, the 2 drops from the Alter B, the unsuspend from the Metal Garurumon, that's pretty much game. And so now you two have been armed with the knowledge that the Omnimon deck is actually terrifying. This is a hell of a gatekeeper deck in the game if I've ever seen one. And the last list we're looking at is going to be Magnamon Armor, which has gotten a nice little update thanks to some new toys introduced in BT17. A lot of cards here are going to look really familiar, especially at the level 3s with VMons as the Searchers, plus 2k in Inheritance, as well as the way to Digivolve for cheaper cost, as well as the 1 copy of the Jamming here. A really nice little split, honestly, I gotta say. Level 4s though is where this thing gets a bit interesting. It's a lot of the Magnamon Armors we've seen before from the Double Typhoon starter deck, the BT13 Magnamon, as well as the, I think, BT7 or BT8 Magnamon here, who was a fan favorite in the Digimon Taskmaster event video. Definitely check that out if you haven't seen it yet, because he is terrifying. But what's more interesting is that alongside BT17, there were some new box toppers, and one of those was a Flame Dramon. The Flame Dramon has a really interesting effect where it has Armor Purge as well as the Raid ability, and then whenever its attack would be redirected, your opponent draws the top card of the security once per turn. This gives you a way to do damage and keep a Digimon on board because of the armor purge, even if you can't get over some of your opponent's big walls. And while many of the box topper cards that were included in BT17 were very useful, this is probably the most popular one as of late. And then the top end of this deck got even more terrifying, even past the mandatory 4 copies of the Magnamon X Antibody level 6, but also including 2 copies of the Imperial Digimon Paladin mode because technically he can Digivolve off of him is horrifying to think about. And because normally it's so difficult to swing over Magnamon X Antibody because his DP is so high, your opponent might opt to go wide instead, and if they do that, then they've got the Paladin mode waiting for them. And then the rest of the deck is just padded out with Tamers and option cards. Things like the Tamers here are going to be 4 copies of the Davis movie promo Tamer card, as well as 4 copies of the Blue Scramble, 4 copies of the Blue Memory Boost, these are all the movie promo versions as well. And then 2 copies of Heaven's Judgment, 2 copies of the Awakening of the Golden Knight, 2 copies of Blinding Ray, I believe these are, and then 1 copy of Final Zubagon Punch. And so for all the doomers out there in the West who are really worried about Magnamon X Antibody, here's some more fuel for the fire. And so with that, we're going to bring the first week of the BT17 Secret Crisis meta report to a close. It really feels like there is something for everybody in this set. I'm having a ton of fun with the Omnimon Ace deck, something I've never really tried before, like this kind of style of deck, as well as the new FenriLoogamon deck, which was much stronger than people thought initially. Something I really enjoy about this set is the fact that in the past, it felt like when Bandai made decks, like the strong decks were here and the weaker decks were here. But in this set, that gap feels much smaller. To the point where we had Eosmon decks and Diabortamon decks taking out things like Magnamon Armor and Imperial Digimon in huge tournaments last weekend. That being said, let me know what decks you folks are interested in or are cooking up in the comments below. I'm gonna get out of here. I've got a ton of playtesting to do. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.